fellow Americans.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
A functioning democracy? Well, let's have a look at it. It costs $2 billion to become president. They're 25% of the total prisoners in the world. They spend over $800 billion a year on arms, which is more than most of the world put together. They've been at war for 250 years since their state was formed 275 years ago. But they can't afford universal health care. They can't afford the 1.7 trillion debt forgiveness for students. They can't afford a programme for the 17 million children that go to bed hungry. Is this a functioning democracy? What's your idea of a democracy?
Know this way this is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was a CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
it would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem. We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails, definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals.
So do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you to guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
Rationality belongs to the cool observers, but because of the stupidity of the average man, he follows not reason but faith, and the naive faith of the proletarian requires necessary illusion and emotionally potent oversimplifications, which have to be provided by myth makers to keep the ordinary person on the right course.
Colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
Well, one of the four principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbundu women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort. Totally false propaganda.
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police but protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, who are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war. Now, I believe in a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. Unfortunately, today's Democratic Party does not. Instead, it stands for a government that is of, by, and for the powerful elite. Now, I'm calling on my fellow common sense, independent-minded Democrats to join me in leaving the Democratic Party. If you can no longer stomach the direction that the so-called woke Democratic Party ideologues are taking our country, then I invite you to join me. Stop it.
Welcome to Redacted on this Tuesday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natalie Morris.
And on this show, we seek the truth wherever it takes us, covering the stories the mainstream media largely ignores. And we have a busy show for you on this Tuesday. Welcome. We're going to be covering the very latest in Brazil, the movements of the Bolsonaro protesters who have been locked up without food, without water. A number of people now confirmed dead inside of these, you might even call them concentration camps. We're going to have the very latest on what's going on in Brazil tonight.
Yes, and plus we are going to talk about the continued expansion of NATO and how that is sitting with Russian President Putin.
Yeah, and we're going to look at the Polish side of all of this. We've got a special guest tonight on that as a journalist to look at how Poland has really gone completely under the radar as far as the mainstream media coverage. Like, what is happening in this country? This country is on the verge of collapse with the amount of refugees that are in that country, but they continue to pour money and weapons into Ukraine. They can't afford it. Like, what is going on? Like, the government doing one thing, the people want something else. So we'll have that coverage for you.
Plus, we have another round of Twitter documents that show just how cozy Pfizer has been with Twitter in stamping down debate around the vaccine rollout.
Yeah, and so Dr. Peter McCullough is going to join us here as a special guest to talk about the bombshell on the Pfizer documents. So we will have all of that. Plus, we're going to have the WEF, the World Economic Forum, kicks off. You guys ready? You guys get your tickets? The World Economic Forum in Davos. Klaus Schwab has his tickets ready. He has his guest list set. And we have a special guest journalist who got his hands on the guest documents, the guest list. And we're going to break that down for you as Redacted starts right now. Welcome, everybody. A lot of people are saying, hey, when is it time to drop the Christmas tree? Like, get rid of the Christmas tree.
Where's the Christmas tree?
Well, we already got rid of ours on the set, so we've Christmased out. Although I can see if you can spot the Christmas gift on the Redacted set tonight. Can you spot the Christmas gift? Anybody?
As in,
Philip,
like,
David?
what was given as a gift?
You're not allowed to play.
If I was going to guess, I'd say it was that teapot.
Teapot.
That's what I was going to say too. Yeah.
That's right. I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Yeah, Natalie got me a little teapot because I said I wanted something on the set during the show. So, I want to keep some tea hot during the whole show.
We're gonna have a tea ceremony later.
Yeah.
But
so
is it really
that means we're married.
If you got hot toddies in it. Like,
well, no, yeah, there's no
still
alcohol in
considered-
it. It is tea. It is hot tea in here, and so I'm trying to see if I can keep this thing hot. It's like a cast iron thing, so don't touch.
How
it'll
long
burn you.
before one of us burns ourselves?
Probably not long, and I guarantee it'll be you.
Yes. I'm going to stay away from it. See this line down the center of the table? You got to keep it on. This is your dance space, and this is my dance space.
I'm going to get a little Bunsen burner. So I'm going to have a whole little
spaghetti arms.
I'll have a whole little crock pot set up over here. I'm going to just have I'll just have some hors d'oeuvres. Just like a cheese tray.
Another thing that Clayton did get for Christmas that he wanted was a mini fridge for his office.
Yes.
He literally wants to move up here.
I know.
He
I've
was
got
so
a man
excited
cave.
about it.
I've got a mini fridge that I have like my, some carbonated waters in there. Like it's
Queen-size bed.
Fantastic. I know. I was looking at watching YouTube videos on how to build a Murphy bed. I'm like, I'm fully going to move up into the studio. It's going to be glorious. Just be gaming and doing the news, and then I'll just be, I'll be happy in my happy place. Hey, we do have a daily newsletter. I hope all of you subscribe to it. It's totally free. All you need to do is go to redacted.inc, put in your email address, click submit, and then you'll receive a welcome email from me. My email is clayton@redacted.inc. You just need to confirm with your email provider that you do want to receive this. So you have to click confirm, verify it, and then tomorrow morning, first thing in the morning, you'll receive our newsletter. We cover like 5 or 6 stories first thing in the morning. Natalie writes it, works very, very hard on it, and I think you'll enjoy it. You can read it like over your cup of coffee first thing in the morning. So again, redacted.inc is the place to go and sign up. And we also have a community. We have a community where you can become a Redacted Rebel VIP for a for a little bit of money. All you need to do is go here, click on the Become a VIP, and boom, it's very easy to do. And when you're on Rumble, there's a big red button that you can click to become part of the community. Only on Rumble can you click that red button. YouTube doesn't have that big red button. So, everything all right over there? Everything okay?
It's okay. I'm not happy with how this shadow is falling on my lady parts because that looks like my nipple, and it's not. So I'm going to put my. Sorry. I'm fixated on this every time I look down. I'm like, what's going on? Because I'm wearing white, which I don't normally.
Is that a nipple?
It's not a nipple, but it looks like. So I'm just going to sit like this. It's not a nipple.
Come on, stop it.
Okay, sorry.
You just get a peek and then you look away. It's like looking at the sun.
We're
just
all good now. We're good.
Look away.
This is why I don't wear white. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Yes,
all right,
this is
ready?
a serious news channel. I can't. If you were you know how it is on a Zoom call. We're like, what's that on my whatever,
No,
You're
I'm not like one of those CNN
not a
anchors
cat.
that's doing whatever on Zoom calls, and
I'm not a cat.
I'm not a cat.
It's not a nipple.
It's not a nipple.
Okay. Let's keep this shot. This shot's good.
All right, you ready to start the show? Nipples out?
I did. I'm sorry,
Nipples
you guys.
away?
I didn't see it beforehand. I apologize. I was unprofessional, but we're keeping it real. Let's go.
Ready? Mm-hmm. All right, the show's getting nipply. Let's start it. All right, let's talk about Brazil. So, shall we? Brazil is a country that is quickly dissolving into a communist dictatorship right before our eyes. It started last year after the head of the Supreme Court. You might not recognize this guy if you're not paying attention because he doesn't get a lot of news coverage in the Western media, but this is Alexander de Moraes, a.k.a. Daddy Warbucks. You might recognize him from the hit movie Annie as well.
You speak Portuguese. You can take that again.
What, Alexander de Moraes?
Okay.
De Moraes.
All right.
Yeah. He threw out, Daddy Warbucks threw out the 9-year prison sentence for convicted criminal President Lula da Silva, now allowing him to run for president. Now, de Moraes is not only the head of the Supreme Court, he's also now appointed himself as the head of the Electoral Court. So you see how this is going, right? He's pulling all of the strings. He's gaining all of the power. He's arguably the most powerful man in Brazil. So former President Jair Bolsonaro didn't stand a chance against this kind of corruption. The globalists, of course, don't like Bolsonaro, who stood up to the farmers, who stood up against the World Health Organization. The list is endless. So for 70 days, the people of Brazil have been protesting mostly peacefully against the move towards communism. And how can the judiciary have such unchecked power? How can the Supreme Court rule the land? Well, we had protesters, of course, then taking to the capital city of Brasilia over the weekend. Of course, these are government offices in the Supreme Court buildings, and mostly peaceful. Then millions of people descended on the Capitol. And they, as this transfer of power was about to unfold, and then we got word about this, agent provocateurs. So this is a really fancy way of saying planted people were there trying to foment violence. People who were dressed up to look like Bolsonaro supporters and protesters were in fact agent provocateurs, there to provoke, there to incite violence.
Like Brazilian Ray Epps?
Yes, like a Brazilian Ray Epps, basically. Exactly. Like, come this way. Come over here to this building. Come here. Let's go. Everybody, you guys going? Let's roll. And that's exactly what happened. So I spoke to investigative journalist Matthew Timerand, who is, he has confirmed the agents of the leftist government were seen dressing like protesters and smashing barricades and inviting the crowds to head this way, like directing them over here. And I had a chance to sit down with Matthew just a few minutes ago. Take a listen. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. I had heard in some of your reporting, and thank you for your reporting on this, that when we started to see these protests unfolding at these government offices, at the Supreme Court building and otherwise, that there were agent provocateurs who were there ahead of time, people who were planted to sort of foment violence. Can you talk specifically about that? And for anyone who's watching thinks, that's got to be a conspiracy theory, what can you tell us about this?
Absolutely. Well, if your audience, I know you've been watching to some degree, and obviously there's such interconnectivity culturally, linguistically between Portugal and Brazil. So I know Portugal's the only place in the world that some of the Portuguese media was covering what's been going on, both leading into the election, then between the first and the second round, and then on the conclusion of the second round, October 30th, what sprung up the following day on the 31st, and then contiguously the entire way until yesterday, was 70 days of peaceful protesting. Not a single arson, hell, not even a fight between two people drinking beer. Nothing. Very clean, prayerful, honest, patriotic Brazilians looking to express their dissatisfaction and distrust with this entire process, the non-transparency. Obviously, you're going to talk about Marias and the censorship, the abrogation of the Constitution, to the point of the Republic is going into yesterday was frayed, and now I believe it may even be dead. So what we saw when the protest happened on, the January 8th, the Sunday that there is marching. I was seeing it because I have so many sources on the ground. Social media connectivity. Brazil, for people who don't know, is perhaps the most social media engaged society on earth. On a per capita basis, on a usage basis, it's overwhelming how engaged Brazilians are in documenting their lives and uploading video. They're very technologically savvy. And we had all this great footage from the peaceful protests outside the military barracks. People, saying to the armed forces, please intercede, please invoke Article 142 because we're losing our republic to a judicial tyranny that is supposed to be adjudicating constitutionality, not shredding it. Well, that's what's happened. So Flavio Dino, the justice minister, who is an avowed communist political Marxist, was a former judge that Lula appointed justice minister, made a statement that they were going to bust up the camps, that they were going to break down these peaceful protests. And again, Brazil, constitutional republic, right to assemble, right to protest, not an unfettered First Amendment like the U.S. There are hate speech laws, certainly on racism, but they do have this right, and Flavio Dino, the justice minister, said no, it's coming to an end. So they had already planned on Sunday is the March day, just generally, not even just this cycle, but historically, Sunday, people have off from work. If there's a political or a cultural manifestation, it happens on Sunday. There were flyers, physical flyers, social media flyers. We will march on Three Powers Square. So this is the center of Brasilia where the three seats of the separated powers, their governance exists. You've got the Supreme Court for the judiciary, you've got the National Congress for the legislature, and you've got the Alvorada and Planalto Palace for the executive branch. And they marched, and we saw video after the fog of war that there was already video being taken as the throngs marched toward it. And these were the agent provocateurs. They were, stamping their feet, cheering, trying to coax them in. And much like the only other incidents, and of course the revolution was not televised, these millions of people, the only other instance of any mainstream global coverage, Reuters, BBC, what have you, was on the pushed up certification on December 12th, Monday, December 12th, where the electoral court Court, overseen also by Marias, certified Lula's win. They pushed that up illegally a week. It was supposed to be the 19th, but they knew the pressure was on, potential military action, Article 142. So they certified it. And then that night, they sent also Antifa types, agent provocateurs, down to burn buses, burn cars. The cars they burned were protesters' cars because they had Brazil with stolen flags on them. And they even admitted it. There was, I know some investigators down there, some citizen journalists who discovered that they paid a homeless vagrant to cause trouble, and he admitted to them on video. So we have all sorts of documentary and video proof, live action proof of what was going on. Of course, Reuters and all the mainstream press reported Bolsonaro supporters, light cars on fire.
And Annaleigh de Kramer in our chat right now says, I saw footage of military protecting people against police brutality, and I had a chance to speak with Matthew about that. And yeah, there were tanks, there were Brazilian military stepping in and interceding in between the protesters and the police. So, you might not like it or it might bother you what the facts are on the ground, but these are the facts, and we're just reporting them. We go where the truth takes us, and what's actually unfolding inside of these basic, some people are calling them concentration camps, where they rounded up about 1,700 people, these pro-Bolsonaro protesters. Many of them children. Yeah, children, older people. 2 elderly women have now died inside. They have no water, no food. And I've seen multiple reports from inside, and speaking to different journalists who were there inside, seeing they don't have water, they didn't have food, they didn't have access to bathrooms. And so some women were just like wetting themselves, going to the bathroom in their own. I mean, it was terrible. Of course, it didn't take CNN long, though, to start comparing these things to the January 6th. So I wanted to sort of take a broader look at how the media has been portraying this in the United States as well. It was immediate to watch CNN kind of jump on this and start to paint these protests as January 6th in the United States and somehow manage to blame Trump for it. Watch.
All right, this breaking news for you right now. A group of supporters of former Brazilian President Bolsonaro have breached security barriers and broken into the Brazilian Supreme Court, the presidential palace, and Congress. CNN's Rafael Romo is here with more on this. So what do we know about the situation?
Yeah, Fred, it's looking more and more like what happened here in the United States on January 6th, 2 years ago. And what happened was that earlier, a group of supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro managed to breach the barriers established by authorities at the congressional building in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil.
So it didn't take them long, of course, like in the first sentence to say this looks, exactly like the United States. And reports are that there were fewer than about 12, maybe 11 police officers who had even erected barricades, and that in some ways that does sound familiar, right? Like where were the police? Like they knew this was coming. They just sort of disappeared. They just melted away from this.
They used up all those rubber bullets they had, I guess, already.
They knew this was coming.
Well, and I think also it's like people are painting everybody as Bolsonaro supporters, but it's like some of it is just the election integrity, because I've seen people post it on Twitter, and then I looked into it. This is the first time they've used voter machines, and there was no paper trail. So people are demanding the source code for the voting machines be released because they feel like that was part of what happened. Is it was
on the same machines too that were used in Arizona. Mm-hmm. So
exactly.
Hey, and we'd like to see that. Like this is the first time, so let us see that open and transparency. Like just let us all see it. Let us see the records, or let the people of Brazil see the accurate records. If you want free and fair elections, let's see it. So CNN just can't help itself. Here's Deep State Intelligence State mouthpiece Jim Sciutto, who we've featured here on the show many times, parroting these same January 6 talking points and election discussion on CNN. Watch.
And we're going to throw up some more of these images here. Those images of supporters of the losing candidate in the Brazilian presidential election, Jair Bolsonaro, storming the houses of government there, including where their assembly meets. We used to talk about, and many folks still imagine this, and perhaps it's true to some extent, the U.S. exports democracy. But as you watch this and how it was seeded by the losing candidate in that election, who had a lot of rapport, one might say, with Donald Trump, is election denialism a new U.S. export?
Election, like that's our new export.
That's nice. Can we put a tariff on it? We've seen this, though, for a long time, them trying to frame Bolsonaro as the Brazilian Trump. and just like, see, it really fits into their narrative. Is like, this is what you get when you have whatever they don't like him for, COVID denialism or autonomy of using their own land for farming or whatever, whatever it is, that they can say, see, then you get crazy supporters who tear down the fabric of society.
And here's MSNBC doing the same thing. So it's not just CNN, but here's MSNBC blaming Trump for what's going on in Brazil. Watch.
Well, and I wonder how much a consequence they're seeing from what we have going on up here. Yes, there are prosecutions for those who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, but the lawmakers who parroted the lies, the lawmakers who still refuse to accept the results of the 2020 election, a lot of them are still in power. And what we saw over the weekend and last week, Peter, was the people who were stopping Kevin McCarthy from becoming speaker many of them were election deniers themselves, the mega MAGA crowd, as they've colloquially come to known as. So I guess the message from that, how does that sound around the world?
Well, I think that's exactly right. That's the message that's being sent. And the message being sent from Mar-a-Lago, by the way, where former President Trump has repeatedly characterized the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021 as patriots, as protesters, as heroes, in effect. He's promised to pardon them if he takes office again. He has encouraged fundraising for organizations defending them as if they were political prisoners, characterizing them as if they were simply people who were rising up against, tyranny instead of the other way around. And of course, that encourages, that kind of thinking elsewhere as well. If that can happen in the United States, there's no consequence for it for the people at the top who make these kind of, encourage this kind of, deceptions about what happened during an election, who encourage the efforts to try to overturn a democratic election. Then it seems more, plausible or credible to do that elsewhere.
So you're basically saying, what you're saying is that the Brazilian people just don't have their own brain, that they're literally waiting for what happens in Washington, D.C. for them to make a decision about their own government.
Right. And they would not have done this if there had been consequences from the January 6th committee.
As if there wasn't
or the Justice Department. Because he's like, there was no consequences. So Brazil literally said, oh, they got away with it. Let's do that too.
And who's got away with it?
As if anyone.
And think about how many people's lives have been ruined,
right,
without due process and been locked up.
As if anyone was waiting for the big finale of the January 6th committee, and they're like, well, if that's all it was a hand slapping, let's do it.
It's ridiculous. And some of these camps, let's just show you some of these camps overnight. Estimates are today it's about 1,700 pro-Bolsonaro protesters have been rounded up and put into these camps without the food and water. One elderly woman earlier today was confirmed dead. Now we have 2. So take a look. This is what it looks like on the inside.
Meu Deus, gente, mais uma pessoa passando mal aqui. Já morreu uma pessoa aqui dentro. Já morreu uma pessoa aqui dentro. Agora são 20 horas e 16 minutos. Mais uma pessoa passando mal aqui. E até agora os bombeiros estão vindo. Já é a terceira pessoa que eles têm que socorrer hoje aqui. E a assistência está sendo péssima. Eles mataram uma mulher ali de Sinop.
So what she's saying, if you don't speak Portuguese, is, look, there's another person that's bad. Look, we're doing really bad. There's so many people here. We don't have any assistance. And then she's pointing out, look, there's another person who is doing bad.
Doing badly, meaning like sick.
Doing poorly.
Yeah, poorly.
Look,
not like doing bad.
Oh, not like doing bad things, but doing poorly. Yes.
And so Democrats, this was the amazing part. I'll kind of wrap it up on this. Is you saw Democrats overnight, almost like they're getting the same talking points from somewhere on Bolsonaro. So right now you have Jair Bolsonaro, who's been in Orlando, Florida, with his family. And then apparently went to the hospital with stomach pains, and some saying this is complications tied to when he was stabbed 2 years ago.
Oh, he said that. He said that on his own Twitter account.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was maybe stress or something. I don't know. Anyway, he's in Orlando. And so now you have all these Democrats coming out, almost like reading from the same list of talking points. Ilhan Omar says, 2 years ago, our capital was attacked by fanatics. Now we are watching it happen in Brazil. Solidarity with Lula and the Brazilian people. Democracies around the world must stand united to condemn this attack on democracy. Bolsonaro should not be given refuge in Florida. Credit to Marina Medvin for catching how the Democratic talking points were almost like all handed out, how they immediately sort of all fell in line. Here's AOC Same thing. The U.S. must cease granting refuge to Bolsonaro in Florida.
What are they suggesting they do to him? Like, it's like,
well, he hasn't been convicted of anything or charged with anything. Would you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, it was an election, but it's like if you take a playbook, like a transparent playbook, and you lay what happened in the U.S. on what's happened in Brazil, it's like the exact same thing.
I have to think of all the parallels. That's like
I know,
an SAT question.
My brain's like, if it's okay.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Yes.
Except Bolsonaro is here, and we don't see it. I don't know. Can we make the same case for whatever he may or may not have said, whether or not he requested this in any nuance of language? I'm not sure about that. And you're right. Like,
well, I'm just saying,
under what grounds can the United States say, like, it's inconvenient for you to be here? We don't have anything to charge you with. We have no reason to extradite you, but we don't like it, and it's inconvenient. So can you, like, scurry on along?
Yeah, Joaquin
please?
Castro here with his says the same thing. Bolsonaro must not be given refuge in Florida. So they're all using this refuge line. So send him back. So on trumped up charges, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? And again, we're just following the facts as they unfold and what the reports are on the ground, according to the sources who were there and watching this unfold. You're seeing, again, here's just one last thing. This is from an elderly individual inside one of these camps talking about the lack of bathrooms and just how bad the conditions have been for these people. Watch.
Sequestrados, colocados dentro de ônibus, dentro do qual ficamos 5 horas, as mulheres de idade se urinando, porque não tinha banheiro. Agora nos trouxeram aqui para quartel, nos revistaram e agora nos jogaram dentro do estádio.
So a lot of people in the chat on Rumble, I just would love to hear your thoughts on this, guys, because a lot of people in the chat are like, yeah, Bolsonaro, I just saw someone say, yeah, Bolsonaro, what crimes? There were no crimes. There are none. So what are they gonna push on him?
I have to think, and I don't know off the top of my head, is there visa-free travel from South America to the United States? I don't think so. I don't know. There's something there. That's not something I know off the top of my head. Whether or not they have the same privileges as Europeans for entry, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, so anyway, we'll see. And let us know your thoughts on Lula and the sort of concessions being made to China right now in Brazil, and the move towards a single currency for all of South America, which is something that Lula champions. Let us know your thoughts on that. But I think, the really interesting thing is to say that is democracy collapsing completely in Brazil when you have full power inside of the judiciary and at the hands of Alejandro de Moraes, that's where the power sits right now.
Who is clearly paving a way for Lula da Silva.
Yes.
And has a history of doing so. So, and then what? This is the question. And then what? What happens now? So that's why we're following this story clearly.
So we'll have more on this, and we're going to have Matthew back on the show. We're going to continue to watch the drama that's unfolding in Brazil. So we will continue to watch that. We're also going to be looking at the very latest in Ukraine and what Vladimir Putin has said over the past 24 hours on the size of NATO and the continued movement of tanks and heavy weapons into Ukraine. Of course, the United States launching its biggest tranche of weapons and money into Ukraine since the beginning of the war, over $3 billion. And we'll be looking at all angles on that story. Plus the COVID files, and Dr. Peter McCullough will be joining us in a little bit later to talk about that as we look at the COVID files. Well, a lot of moving pieces in the war in Ukraine. Over the past 24 hours, we heard from Russia that they are, in fact, now fighting the full weight and force of NATO. Of course, we've been saying this as the Ukrainian military has all but collapsed. So NATO ramping up additional heavy weapons, heavy tanks, the United States announcing their largest tranche of weapons and money going to Ukraine, another $3 billion. Germany, France, Italy, and Poland. Now, Poland is a story that hasn't gotten a lot of attention in the mainstream media. It has been largely ignored, but this country is collapsing under the weight of millions of Ukrainian refugees. And it's odd, a country that it continues to support the war in Ukraine, continues to funnel weapons and money into that country, despite the fact that Poland is essentially collapsing. For that, we want to bring in independent journalist Derek Monroe, who is just returned from Poland not too long ago, also returned from Ukraine, and is heading back to Poland later this week. Derek, thank you so much for your coverage and joining us here on Redacted. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So tell us what you were just in the Donbass not too long ago. You are watching what has been unfolding, and we're hearing some conflicting numbers between the number of refugees that have been pouring across the border into Poland. What are the latest numbers that you're hearing that have gone into Poland and are essentially crushing that country's services to be able to even provide for these people?
A correction, I was actually in Bukovina, which is western part of Ukraine, next to Romania, Hungary, and Poland, Slovakia.
Okay, so you were on the border right there with Poland then.
That's right. And the problems with refugees is truly amazing because it seems like all the height of the wave of the refugees who were coming back following immediate attack of Russians in February kind of subsided because the issue became a little bit less political on the humanitarian side. But numbers are increasing right now, specifically when Russian military is attacking civilian infrastructure in the wintertime, which provides a lot of Ukrainian cities to be without gas or electricity. So even Ukrainian government, Zelensky's government, is saying to people basically, if you really want to live in a normal, civilized conditions, you better leave the country. And basically most of the people are leaving for Poland right now. And the situation is really dire. They're expecting more people coming in the coming weeks. Right now, the estimates are between 3.8 to 4.2 million Ukrainians living in Poland alone, which are being housed in a variety of different scenarios like houses, private homes, schools which are being converted. There are some sports centers which are also being transferred to some kind of refugee makeshift centers. And the most fundamental issue, which I think a lot of people don't want to address on both governmental level and the civilian level, is that Poland is really not a very wealthy country that can really afford to take care of this. So this is really also creating a lot of dissonance within this Polish society, where there are a lot of different aids and a lot of different social programs, or even healthcare, which was normally reserved and provided for the Polish people, are now being basically diverted to Ukrainians. And by the whole dynamics of the numbers, people who are paying for a lot of the services, their own taxes, are not getting the services anymore. So this is really truly becoming a political domestic issue as well.
Now, I've been hearing from a lot of Polish viewers who say, look, Clayton, we can't get the information out of Poland. Like when we try to get accurate information about what's actually happening, we're being censored. We're not getting access to news here. And they do not want this war. And so there seems to me from the Polish views that I'm hearing and the sources speaking to the government that I've been speaking to, there's a big disconnect here from what the Polish government and its support of NATO and the Polish people. And it's how did the Polish government become such a sidekick of the United States in Ukraine?
Well, it's a longer story that goes back to 1989, where they have a changeover with the government, where they nominally came from communist system into so-called free economic capitalist system. It turned out, fast forward back to 2015, where Peace Party, the current ruling party, took over after the elections where they defeated the neoliberal PO party, the platform of Batelska. The country itself became sort of a quasi-socialist, quasi-right-wing Catholic party, which wanted to emphasize of Polish nationalism, Polish history, in order to bring lowest common denominator of patriotism to kind of collect groupthink and sort of regurgitate all the good talking points from a right wing to have the most popular appeal. And they also have instilled, just like in Orban in Hungary, a lot of social programs specifically directed towards alleviating poverty in Polish society. Let's say 500 plus, which was supposed to help the Polish citizens to have children, to basically eradicate poverty among more children, which I think was a really big issue till then. And unfortunately, you have a political system that it's basically regurgitating not only the talking points from the West, but has been infiltrated by basically Western NATO and a variety of different players who are simply are performing a function of the state, which supposedly qualifies itself as independent and sovereign, but all the major foreign policy decisions has been outsourced, whether to Brussels or to Washington, D.C. So you have a sort of a very much a cognitive dissonance here, where you have a very much a nationalist rhetoric towards implementing a variety of different social programs and building up country as a one individual homogeneous unit. Well, on the other hand, you have a de facto political powers that that give not only messagings but ultimate military and political support to Ukraine, which have had a very, very complicated history going before World War II, but specifically since World War II, where there are major massacres in Volhynia in 1943, where up to 150,000 Poles were massacred by uprisings of Ukrainian nationalists against the Poles. So it's got a situation here. We have a situation here which is sort of a three-dimensional chess where there's a very heavy rhetoric on the nationalism, patriotism, helping the Ukrainians and helping a variety of different people to achieve certain goals. But it's also the Polish state itself has been sort of decapitated from a decision-making power. It's gotten itself to the point of grotesqueness where they basically giving away their military equipment for free to Ukrainians. And the latest news was the Leopard tanks, which they themselves bought from Germany, which were used, which a lot of those tanks required lots of capital outlay investment to actually bring up to the modern standards, to fix them up, what have you. And now they're being transferred to Ukrainian side for next to nothing.
This is unbelievable. So they buy them from Germany. So the Polish military buys them from Germany. They're in Poland. Now they're giving them to Ukraine essentially for free. Of course, we know, we've been covering here on this show, that the Ukrainian military, the manpower, the expertise to run a lot of this heavy equipment, they don't have it. So a lot of NATO forces are being used to run these different pieces of equipment. Can you speak to the Polish military, Polish soldiers inside of Ukraine? How many of them? Do you happen to have a number? We've certainly seen reports of this. How many there might be, and how are they actually actively in the front lines using these heavy equipment?
Well, there are a variety of different video reports, as well as going back last week, where the Polish TV was, TVN for that matter, was showing up some reports around Kharkiv, and they saw several soldiers with the Polish flags on the uniforms. So this is a standard issue military equipment that's used to Poland. The Polish government official stand on the issue is that these are quote-unquote volunteers that went to fight over there.
Right.
And what's interesting, right now there's talk about between 1,100 or 1,200 Poles that actually became casualties of this war. However, the coverage of the funerals has completely been eradicated from the mass conscious Polish media. Polish media simply does not report on it. So occasionally you will see some local newspaper or some local bulletin board explaining, well, this young man died in Ukraine, and we have a service for him today, and so on and so forth. But this is sort of out of sight, out of mind. So it's sort of like a very much an undercover situation. It's almost like a psyops operation that's actually being run into a variety of different parts of Ukraine, where those people actually wind up joining Ukrainian forces, whether they're mercenaries or simple volunteers. It's really hard to tell. But there are definitely people who are operating some of the equipment that came from NATO and being donated to Ukrainians. But once again, it's very difficult to confirm those issues. You literally have to go on the ground. And if you're not in bed, then you obviously, if you're an independent journalist, you have a lot of problems reporting from it, because you might be considered basically a spy or someone who does enemy propaganda and get yourself in a lot of trouble and arrested, for example.
Unbelievable. I mean, we are in an information war, and you were there covering this. This is why we're hearing from so many Polish viewers that say, we can't get any information. Our government is lying to us, keeping this hidden. The media is keeping this hidden from us. You were there on the ground. So what pushback did you get? Because you were on the border there. You were watching the flood of people heading into Poland. What were you hearing from Ukrainian government officials? Were they asking you to keep certain things quiet, trying to hide certain things from you, from your reporting? And what were you hearing from the Polish side? Have they been happy with your reporting?
I think definitely there's some degree of coordination of the messaging, which basically tends to create some kind of degree of consolidated narrative, what's going on within let's say, civilian population in Ukraine itself, and what's going on within, let's say, the front lines. My sources were telling me people who are coming back from the front, which I discussed with several people while I was over there. The first and foremost complaint was that most of the aid or military equipment that's supposed to be going to the units is not getting there. I was given a variety of different estimates between 25 to 30% of stuff that actually sent to them actually arrives, and everything else sort of disappears on the way. So there are a lot of complaints regarding the equipment that's being sent over from Europe, for example, that's obsolete, built in 60s and 70s and 80s, that sometimes you can't even get ammunition for it, or stuff is really not functioning. So it's this is especially coming from the stuff from Germany. Germany's been donating quite a lot of military equipment, sort of a personal, not only personal motorized carriers, but also and Sweden as well, like TOW missiles type of anti-tank equipment. Some of the stuff, quite a lot of the stuff actually doesn't work because it's basically been obsolete. So it's almost sort of a paradoxical situation where the West gives a lot of lip service to Ukrainian forces that, yes, we want to give you the best possible help that you can get, the best possible equipment, but actually what arrives is different. It's quite possible that maybe the good stuff is being picked out and then shipped out to Africa or someplace like this. Recently, about 10 days ago, though, President Obasanjo of Nigeria actually stated that actually a lot of the weapons that originally were destined from Poland to Ukraine is now showing up in Mali and in northern Nigeria. So it seems like there's definitely a trade going on somewhere where some of the weapons are basically being monetized, being sold in the black market. So that's part one of the reasons.
Yeah, we've certainly been covering the reports here on this show about a lot of these weapons just winding up on the black market. Very little of them actually making it to the people who apparently need it. When you were in Ukraine just a few months ago, you were at the border. What did you witness on the Ukrainian side heading into Poland? Because you were telling me a little bit before the show, and I think it's fascinating, and I want our viewers to hear this. What I find extremely amazing is that the Ukrainian government itself simply doesn't care for its own people. The very limited amount of help that's being given, it's simply nothing's comparison to what Ukrainians really need. So many times local officials, let's say in Bukovina area where I was when I spoke with them, they tell me that they have no resources to help their own people. They just simply tell them, go to Poland, go to Romania, go to Hungary. That's where help is waiting for you. So in a way, they are just sort of passing the buck. Plus, there's also a situation where a lot of the refugees coming from eastern part of Ukraine, which is Russian-speaking, doesn't particularly get along, or it's liked in western Ukraine, which is Ukrainian, going back generations. So they're also there's definitely a lot of animosity between on a cultural basis as well as the language basis itself. So in a way, it kind of creates a situation where the government itself tries to portray itself as a great custodian of the people that's fighting a heroic war, but in reality, Ukraine is completely different. And this is really kind of hurtful because, those people are being put into this war situation, not a fault of their own. This is really something that most people don't realize. When there's a narrative which is being spanned about February 2022 invasion, people are looking at this situation. That's when the war started. When in fact, this whole thing started in 2014 at the Euromaidan Square, February 20th, 2014, which actually happened to witness the coup. I was actually there at the square. Wow. When I saw all the fighting, how this whole thing transpired. So in a way, there's definitely very different narrative that's being spun in the Polish and the Ukrainian and Western media versus really what happened. And this is really something very strange from someone who's looking at this from a Western American perspective. It sees, well, it kind of follows the stereotypes of good guy versus bad guy. Good Ukrainians, good Westerners versus the evil Putin, for example, where the reality and is really mixed and much more nuanced, because both sides commit war crimes, both sides mistreat their own prisoner population, the POWs, for example, and there's been many documented facts of the Ukrainians committing war crimes as well as Russians. This unfortunately happens in war, and so West tries to kind of portray this whole thing sort of from sanitized situation where there's a very clear victim and there's a very clear aggressor, where if you really look in microcosm of the military,
engagements on the ground, things can be very different from hour to hour depending on dynamic of the battlefield. So it's really strange.
And you're going to be heading back there this week, bringing aid, bringing provisions, supplies to the Polish people. And so that's amazing. You're going to be bringing, because they are in need right now. I mean, they are literally suffering. And we'll have a link in the description if people want to donate, a Facebook page from a group that you're affiliated with that is going to be bringing some of these supplies. Can you tell us a little bit about the aid that you're bringing to the Polish people?
Well, I have had a very good luck of bringing my own help, as well as I would like to thank Jewel Askell supermarket chain here, which is part of Albertsons. They donated an amazing amount of sweets and candies and chocolate for the kids, as well as some small miscellaneous items, which I'm bringing just on my own to this organization. And British Airways have been kind enough to donate the cargo space. So this is something which I normally do not do, but I see the need is so great.
Right.
Just what I saw there just when I was there in October. So it is essentially a business trip for me. I decided to do something about this. So, people can often complain, this and that, but it's like, it's getting to a point where I have an opportunity to really make a difference. And obviously it's very small, 50 kilograms, not going to change anything, but it's obviously
To somebody it'll, yeah. And we'll have
Whatever
a link in our description. So if anyone wants to, any Polish families who, or anyone who wants to donate and be able to help the people, because again, these are governments pushing and making these people suffer, not the people themselves. And that's really at the heart of all of this. Derek Monroe, we really appreciate you joining us here before your flight. Thank you for shedding some light on what's happening with the Polish people right now, and have a safe trip, and we'll have you back on real soon.
Sure. Thank you very much. Anytime. Thanks.
And a big update, too. We've been watching what's unfolding with Russian forces moving on to the area of Bakhmut. And at this hour, it looks like Russia is set to capture Soledar and its huge underground tunnel network as well, which is a salt mining town. This would give them access to Bakhmut. Apparently, it's been terrible and absolutely bloody battles that have been unfolding in Soledar. The Ukrainian government saying basically it's lost now. So this will be a major strategic frontline move against Bakhmut. So the fighting absolutely continues, and we will continue to follow it, the very latest in Ukraine. So our thanks to Derek for joining us. And again, we'll have links in the description if anyone has Polish relatives or had nothing to do with Polish and you would like Poland and you would like to help in any way that you want. Just simple provisions. Isn't it sad, though, that like NATO and this war is like bleeding this country dry because these governments are doing this? And
they've decided that that's an acceptable loss.
Right.
That we can rip Poland apart. They can suffer.
The people can suffer.
It's not like the rest of us who are suffering from sanction-related inflation. Right. They're literally suffering with, things that they cannot get for basic civil liberties of
diapers, basic medicines, all of that. So again, you can help, and if you like, again, we'll have a link in the description so you can check that out. We've got more news to get to on this Tuesday, a very busy show. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. Your name will pop up here on our big board. We are Redacted. We just go where the truth takes us. We don't cover the stories that the mainstream media does because they largely ignore the big stories, like Poland, for instance. Like they're not covering Poland at all. Or
the Twitter files, which we're about to talk to you about. No, quite the opposite. They are continuing to platform the people who perpetuate government censorship and online censorship. So we're going to talk about that in a second.
Yeah, and Dr. Peter McCullough is going to be joining us as well with his take on the Pfizer portion of this big story. So you don't want to miss Dr. Peter McCullough joining us in just a moment. But first,
we'd like to tell you about our friends over at Rocket Money. Now, this is a company I've used for a really long time because I believe that money goes to people who like to take good care of it. And how do you be a good steward of your finances is to keep on top of your liabilities. Clearly, Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill, is a personal finance app that finds and cancels all of your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. Over 80% of the people people have subscriptions that they may not know about or they may have forgotten about. If you don't say check your statements all of the time, or check your Apple or your Google Play subscriptions, or check your credit card subscriptions, what Rocket Money will do is allow you to sign into those accounts through your Rocket Money account. And they'll say, did you know you have these subscriptions? Now, for us, since we're a media company, it regularly lets me know all of the newspapers and Substacks and media filters that I pay for, things that are behind paywalls. And I have to let it know, yes, I really do read this much news, but you might find things that you absolutely do not want or don't want. For instance, I had a lot of like subscriptions to baby podcasts and baby Substacks and things like that. Well, my kids aren't babies anymore. So when it reminded me that I still had those things, I'm like, no, I don't really want to listen to a podcast anymore about sleep training babies, because they sleep pretty much from now on. Yeah, I don't need that. I'm not having any more babies. So let Rocket Money find what you don't need anymore to free up your cash by lowering your liabilities. Rocket Money will quickly and easily identify your subscriptions so you can stop paying for the ones you want. And they will cancel your subscriptions for you so you don't have to haggle with these subscription services. Let them take care of it. So stop throwing away your money, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/redacted. That's rocketmoney.com/redacted. One more time. It's free to sign up. rocketmoney.com/redacted.
All right, let's talk. Let's talk now about the Twitter files. We call them, well, I guess we can call them the Pfizer Files, because this is really at the heart of this latest document dump. Alex Berenson, who, by the way, was blocked, banned on Twitter, was put in charge of...
Because Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who is at the center of this round of Twitter files, was actively after Alex Berenson, who is the journalist who published this round. So he gets to kind of hit back at him. It is a bit of a clapback.
Yeah.
And it's fun to watch. For a little bit. I'm going to say it's fun. Because
you get to see someone being such a baby about it, right? You get to see Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who is like, was on the air like every morning. I just saw him the other day, like on MSNBC in the morning. Like he's on Morning Joe. He's on the CNBC talk shows, like every morning pushing Pfizer vaccines.
But acting like we should not have a personal response to what he's doing. So we're going to show you what he's been up to and whether or not you think it's fair game to have a personal response to him acting in his own self-interest during the rollout of the COVID vaccine. So it has to do again with Dr. Scott Gottlieb. Here is his Twitter account. He is a Pfizer director, former FDA commissioner, and CNBC contributor, and he was actively pressuring Twitter to remove information that might negatively influence public perception of the COVID vaccine. Now, first of all, I don't like this bio. Can we just leave it up for a second? Can we put it back?
Oh, his Twitter bio?
Yeah.
Senior fellow?
Okay. Now, these are a lot of conflicting jobs. We should inherently be suspect of someone who was the FDA commissioner, but now on the board of Pfizer, who is a contributor to a major media outlet. Now, I too was once a CNBC contributor. I worked as more of a reporter than someone who was speaking on behalf of a company or an industry. But when I appeared on air, I was asked to disclose my own investments and conflicts so that they could put it on my own contributor page. So for instance, they asked, do you have stock in any of the companies that you've done your first report in? And I said, well, we have an exchange traded fund with some of these stocks. And they were like, can you get us the perspectives? Because we want to fully disclose to viewers whether or not I have a conflict. So if I was, let's say, covering an Apple conference and you sought out my name, you could see that maybe we had some Apple stock at the time or something like that. I wasn't an active trader. I wasn't speaking on behalf of Apple in order to influence my stock. But I had to disclose that it was in a fund, like a 401-based fund, 401k-based fund. CNBC doesn't seem to be that to really care that much about disclosing for Scott Gottlieb, though. Dr. Gottlieb is currently on Pfizer's board. Here's his page on Twitter's website saying so.
This is Pfizer's website.
This is Pfizer's website saying that he is currently on the board. I don't know why we need to know his age is 50, but Okay. And CNBC, you know, when they're supering him, which what we call in the business is like, how do we write his title at the bottom of the screen, or how do we attribute him? Well, look at just the most recent pieces he's done. They're calling him former FDA commissioner and CNBC contributor. They are not mentioning that he is on the board of Pfizer, therefore speaking with a conflict.
No, they never put him
Sometimes the anchors will throw to him that way. Go ahead.
They're not disclosing that he's not just a board member. He's like an executive board member. So it's like he's like one of the top board members. It's not just a regular board member position.
Yeah. Now, sometimes you can see the anchors will throw to him that way, and but most of the time they're just like, Scott Gottlieb is back. Scott, what about blah, blah, blah. And so they don't bother to disclose to you that he is on the board of Pfizer, which I think is really important as we're talking about issues such as the biopharmaceutical complex. But at least on his contributor page, it does say that he serves on the board of Pfizer, so they can sort of CYA. If you know that acronym, it's not an acronym, it's an initialism. If you know that initialism, they can cover their a-hole. And so, you know, now at least we know who we're dealing with and how he has special privileges with the media. So what did he do? Well, according to these Twitter files, Dr. Gottlieb wrote to Twitter asking them to censor information about natural immunity. Here's the email, and you can see at the bottom the tweet that we're dealing with. It's from Dr. Brett Scherer. He tweeted that it's clear now that natural immunity is superior by a lot, and that he's saying that there is no scientific justification for taking this if you have had a previous infection. I'm paraphrasing just because I want to play by the rules of engagement here. Now, Dr. Gottlieb writes to Todd Boyle. We're going to talk about who Todd Boyle is in a second, and says this is corrosive. Here he drops a sweeping conclusion off a single retrospective study in Israel that hasn't been peer reviewed. But this tweet will end up going viral and driving news coverage. Heaven forbid we should have a discussion about a scientific paper and that it should go viral because it will hurt him and his company and his bottom line. Now, do we know, let's circle back around to this recipient of said email, Todd Boyle. Who is this? Well, listen to Berenstein himself tell Tucker.
Berenson.
I'm sorry, Berenson. I'm saying it like the Berenstein Bears.
Berenson. Yeah.
He is not one of the Berenstein Bears. He's a person named Berenson. Listen to him tell Tucker Carlson exactly who this character, Todd O'Boyle, is.
What's also so striking about that is that when Gottlieb had a problem, he went to a guy named Todd O'Boyle. Todd O'Boyle is a lobbyist, a senior lobbyist in Twitter's Washington office, and he is the guy the White House turned to first when they wanted to censor at Twitter. So we have evidence of, let's say, overlap between Pfizer and the White House as they tried to push vaccines, as they tried to discourage vaccine hesitancy, and as they tried to suppress debate around the vaccines.
Okay, so this all comes full circle because you probably have noticed that we're not talking about a Twitter files about government intervention, but they are very chummy. There is a Venn diagram, if you will, right, of a cast of characters. Now, the very next week after this, like, let's not let them talk about natural immunity. And Twitter actually did flag that tweet with a misleading tag. Berenson doesn't say how this happened because that original tweet is still up there with a misinformation tag. And he does say that Twitter internally didn't find any problem with that tweet. So we're not sure how the misleading tag got there, why it's still there. That's a hole. And then the following week, Gottlieb flagged another tweet about the low mortality rate in children. And not ironically, the Pfizer vaccine was approved for children shortly after. And he even told Twitter, you know, we have the vaccine coming out. We can't have this where people are saying that this is not worth the risk for children. Twitter didn't do anything about that request, but it doesn't change the fact that he was super comfortable making it with Twitter.
Oh, and he also on CNBC, not just even Twitter, but on CNBC and MSNBC, I watched him multiple times talk about children getting the vaccine. And he was asked specifically about, from Becky and others on CNBC, you know, what about our children? How should, and, oh, yes, it's safe and effective and there should no problems at all.
Yeah.
You know, and we're going to,
Well, we already have the information about Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, making extreme statements about the risk to children. He now is facing an investigation in the UK for that very thing. But this is now someone else on the board of Pfizer doing the exact same thing and having a large pulpit to speak from because the media gives it to him with no qualms whatsoever and I don't see a single anchor pushing back on him and saying, well, thank you for telling us what you think of the vaccine, but we have to point out that you have a conflict because you'll make money from it.
Right.
Who else should we talk to?
I mean, Pfizer's paying him over $370,000. Like Pfizer is paying him
annually
$370,000. How can you have a guy who goes on television then and tells people, can give people advice about the very vaccine that he's going to make money off of?
Right.
It's the same conflict of interest that, the members of Congress can be, investing in these companies while at the same time being in committees that are directly involved in, shaping these companies.
Yeah. Now, in response to this Twitter Files dump, Dr. Gottlieb has gone full on whiny baby. Here is his response. I can't show you all of it because some of it I think would be containing hate speech, but I am going to show you his Twitter handle and you could seek it out himself. Basically, his response is like, you shouldn't be picking on me personally. So let's just read it and dissect it, and maybe that's your read or maybe it's not. In the past, he says, I've raised concerns with Twitter related to the safety of me and others and threats being made on the platform. This included direct as well as specific threats. Sometimes it included statements that I believed were purposely false and inflammatory. The selective disclosures of my private communications with Twitter stokes the threat environment. So does actions that empower people who've shown little restraint when it comes to purposeful vitriol. It instigates more menacing dialogue with potentially serious consequences. If the goal of Twitter Files is transparency, here's some of the private emails I had to Twitter. So I think that he's really trying to get out in front of this, like a gotcha moment.
Yeah.
I don't really see it that way, but he really, was like, I don't know. The tone of this makes me make this
it's
face.
Cringe. Yeah, it's very cringe.
Like, knock it off. You go on TV all the time, so you accepted the risk of taking people's personal opinions about what you do. You furthermore go on TV with an inherent conflict of interest and then act like you're the victim when you are speaking to the American people about something that people are losing their jobs if they don't comply, not allowed to go to schools if they don't comply, and it's somehow about poor you. I reject that vehemently. So he posts some emails where he's saying this person is doxing me and I've given, this information over to my wife, although he posted this himself. And so he doxed himself by giving away his email address here. So fine, although this email address was in other Twitter dumps from Alex Berenson. Now, I do sympathize for him. It's awful to feel exposed on the internet, but again, he exposes himself by taking on these public roles. And you have to know that legally, you taking on a public role change your civil rights. You can't really defame a public person. The laws are different if you are putting yourself out there, which he is. Here's one thing that he says, and I'm not going to show you this, but he says that people have called him, can I say this word?
What word?
People have called him, they're saying you should be judged harshly for what you did during the pandemic. And
basically, basically people are saying, hey, where you had natural immunity and where we now know, and the data was there, that it was more effective for you to have gotten COVID and for your children than it would be to actually give them an injection. And then what does that injection lead to? It could have led to all kinds of adverse problems. By
Pfizer's own admission, through their own document. So people are saying that through his actions, it led to people losing their lives, right? And so they're calling him
a murderer.
Yeah. And he's saying this should be disallowed. Now, I admit it's ugly speech, but I think that it's kind of fair game for the rules on the internet. You are pushing something where there is data that people get hurt from it.
Right.
and you are pushing it with a conflict of interest, and then you are trying to stamp down conversation around it. So I'm having a really hard time empathizing with him. I don't know, Philip and David, do you want to ring in if it's fair game? Go ahead.
Well, let me just say, this is one of the questions I'm going to ask Dr. Peter McCullough. He's going to be joining us in a few moments here, because that's a question I want to find out from him. Like, you know about the natural immunity. You're pushing this. Imagine like a mom or a dad just like flipping on CNBC and they see the doctor. Oh, the doctor said it's okay for me to do this to my 5-year-old. The doctor who's paid by Pfizer. Like, and I went and did this, and then we have some sort of an adverse reaction. Like, that is a problem, is it not?
Well, in my opinion, is you can give them a little bit of forgiveness and a little leeway if they did not have the data. The fact that they had the data before makes it that fair game, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. I guess I wanted to see what you guys thought, though, of this kind of speech towards a public figure I feel like that is also fair game. I mean, people say this to Trump all the time. People say it to Biden. Yeah. People say it to to Fauci. Absolutely. So that's kind of the way of it.
I'm a nobody, and they said it to me when we talked about this a couple years ago. They tell me I was killing a bunch of people. Like, people just say that because that's their truth, and I think that's fine. But the thing is, in some instances, it is justified because it is literally true.
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten death threats here on the show. People have written us. I mean, say, how dare you, tell the truth about the war? Like, I mean, it's crazy. So, I mean, it happens all day long. You put yourself out there. Yeah. He's not afraid. He's literally on CNBC like every morning. Like every freaking morning, the guy is on TV. He loves being on TV. So he's constantly there. He's on the board of Pfizer. He's the former FDA. He has a new book. So now he's even got a new book. He's on he's promoting about the pandemic. So that's the next thing that he's out there promoting right now this past week. Every time they introduce him, they're like, Scott Gottlieb, the author of the brand new book about vaccines and the pandemic and whatever the hell it is. So he's out there. Yeah.
So having Gottlieb, though, be the subject of these Twitter files by Berenson is, like I said, poetic justice, since Berenson had previously disclosed that Gottlieb was one of the people behind getting Berenson himself banned from Twitter in 2021. Here are the emails. Berenson wrote this about Dr. Anthony Fauci, and it was a critical article, and Scott Gottlieb forwarded it to, I think, again, O'Boyle at Twitter and said, this is what's promoted on Twitter. This is why Tony needs security detail. In this article, Alex Berenson doesn't threaten Dr. Fauci at all. He is just highly critical of his actions up to this point. Look at the email. It's August of 2021. And so he then further goes and uses a different account and a different Substack, and Scott Gottlieb, like a stalker, finds his sort of new platform and says, "Oh, he switched accounts on you. Go get him." That's a little obsessive. And his job is not social media manager at Pfizer. He's a physician. So Berenson was later reinstated after he filed a federal lawsuit against Twitter over the ban. And as part of that settlement, Twitter had to restore his account and admit that it had been wrong to suspend him. And now that he's back, he has this to hit back at Dr. Gottlieb for this obsession that they mutually maybe have for one another. Now, so some questions. Why did Twitter make this decision about posting misinformation around the natural immunity question? We don't have that. Why did Dr. Gottlieb have this privileged line of communication? Who else at Pfizer did? Does this prove privilege for big pharma and censorship of dissenting voices? I think that much is crystal clear. Clearly. And should CNBC still allow Gottlieb airtime after this clear manipulation of information based on personal interests? I await that decision.
Well,
I would love to know
Yeah, and all of this information that's coming out in the Twitter files makes me just more and more curious about the other platforms. And I'm not going to say an instance of who, but we have had, I believe, companies get access to the same area that the government was. Like, you can kind of understand the federal government getting into these things for like warrants or whatever, like having a backdoor for warrant service or whatever. but for corporations to do it. Like, I don't think it's fair that government should, but I'm saying you could kind of see that being a thing. But like corporations, and I think that they have had a strong arm in pulling creators down.
Yeah. Oh, you just want to see, well, and just on the corporations piece on this for a second. So just people who are watching understand how this all works. So here is his book, okay? Here's Dr. Scott Gottlieb's brand new book. It's called Uncontrolled Spread, okay? And I want you to look at the front page, the front cover. Instead, his current job is what? Pfizer board. He works at Pfizer right now. His current job, he makes $374,000 a year from Pfizer. But on the book jacket, it has his last job, former FDA commissioner, and also this is produced by HarperCollins. HarperCollins is a News Corp publisher, right? HarperCollins is a News Corp publisher. And then look who they get here to do book jacket reviews. The very first, News Corp also owns Wall Street Journal. So right here, you have Wall Street Journal pull quote, like praising the book. Wall Street Journal is owned by the same company that owns HarperCollins, which is News Corporation. So, like, do you see how incestuous this whole thing is?
Yeah.
And you have and then he goes on, and then every time he goes on TV, when he's on MSNBC and he's on all these television stations, they're always pushing this book. So a lot of times these news corporations, they own the whole thing. So they push him, they make money off of him being on there. They sell a book, they make money, he makes money. It's just one big incestuous pot.
But what I find so unconscionable is that they'll just have him on again as if this didn't happen, as if, the question for him is, why were you so concerned about shutting down legitimate conversation on Twitter?
Right.
Around the COVID vaccine, during the rollout of the vaccination program, but nobody will ask him that question. They'll just have him on again to talk about monkeypox or what have you.
I do want to ask Dr. Peter McCullough that very question. So when we come back, we're going to take a little quick break when Dr. Peter McCullough will join us with his thoughts on Dr. Scott Gottlieb and the Pfizer files. But first, I want to tell you about our friends at Moomoo. So right now, it is 2023. It's a perfect time to start investing and learn about this market because the market is crazy right now. It's we're seeing like a little bit of an uptick here, which is nice. Great. That's good. But you can get some free stocks right now just for opening your Moomoo account. It's a trading account, and you can download it on your iPhone, your Android device, your Mac, your Windows PC. It doesn't matter, but you need to use that URL, redacted.inc/Moomoo. Get 15 free stocks. What you do is you get a free stock when you open the account, and then when you make your initial deposit, you get registered to get those additional stocks. So they'll walk you through it on the website. But the beauty of it is right now, even if you don't want to invest, you don't want to do anything else with that money, you could just sit there with those free stocks. And then as the market turns around in the next 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, whenever it is, and starts going back up, then those stocks that you have could start making some good money. You can cash them out. You can put that money in your account. You can do whatever you want, frankly. I've rebalanced my portfolio here during Christmas time. I spent quite a bit of time going through and repositioning what stocks I want to be investing in the commodity space in 2023. So completely rebuilding my portfolio, setting my different alerts for different price points on things that I want to invest in, and all of that right inside of my Moomoo app. So you can do that right now. Go to redacted.inc/Moomoo today to get 15 free stocks right now. Well, joining us now to talk about these Pfizer censorship revelations is author of Courage to Face COVID, a remarkable book. You should all read it. Renowned cardiologist, Dr. Peter McCullough. Doc, welcome back to the show. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
So I would flip on CNBC in the morning sometimes to see some of the business news, and just about every stinking morning, I would see Dr. Scott Gottlieb on the show on a regular basis, on a daily basis, to get their daily COVID update. So we learn in these Pfizer documents, we learn in these Twitter documents, just the lengths that he was going to try to censor voices, particularly around natural immunity. So Doc, let's start there on the natural immunity piece. That's the part that really stood out to me.
Clayton, I can tell you, I was appalled at what I learned. I'm a frequent contributor on Fox News, Newsmax, many stations. I do it all pro bono. I don't receive $1 for doing this. And we learned that former FDA chairman Scott Gottlieb, who's young and he's underaccomplished as an academic physician, he certainly isn't at my level of standing. You could tell he was ripe to go on the take. And we learn now that he was being paid $365,000 a year for Pfizer, by Pfizer, had a frequent contributor contract with CNBC, and he was going on in almost a daily basis from his garden patio, if you remember, through the pandemic. I watched it too. And Andrew, Becky, and Joe and CNBC took it hook, line, and sinker, everything he said. And he misled the country regarding natural immunity, regarding the pandemic, juicing the country with fear, and then juicing and ginning up interest and almost certainly investment in Pfizer for their vaccine.
So he on Twitter, of course, in response to some of these revelations, is now defending himself, saying, "Well, I was just merely trying to quiet some of the people who were being mean to me personally." Basically, do you buy that line?
Well, let me tell you what. If he thinks he's received some mean treatment on Twitter, there are so many esteemed scientists, including myself, who are suspended for no reason. We're constantly attacked. We've had unfollow programs, unlisting programs, blacklisting, shadow banning. We faced it all. Gottlieb defrauded America for the profits of Pfizer. That's what we've learned. He was actually communicating with Twitter, and they were doing it. They were silencing scientists who were bringing forward important information on natural immunity. It mattered because the whole world was getting COVID, and people who were recovered, they needed to know what to expect. And Gottlieb deceived the world on this.
If people tuned in to CNBC, a mom who was at home with her kids, maybe the kids were home sick from school that day, and she flips on CNBC, and she sees this doctor who's telling her, go out, get your children vaccinated, go out, get these booster shots, do all of these things. I mean, who knows what happens to those families in those situations, but they're trusting this person that they're putting on the air as a doctor's a fair and impartial voice in this, but he's not at all.
He's not. In fact, being a former FDA commissioner now is used as a false title. It's used as a pretext for government honesty and integrity, that he would carry honesty and integrity from a government position into a paid board member position. And we've now seen this with the commissioner that followed him, Stephen Hahn, who joined the investment capital firm for Moderna. We had Rick Bright inside the White House, joins the Rockefeller Foundation. There is a very, very deep and corrupt collusion, conflict of interest between industry and our public health agencies. And the mechanism is basically these interrelationships that occur when people are in office to get their next job after they leave office. And
I'll get you out here on this, Doctor. He's not the only one. I mean, there's a long history here of this cozy relationship with FDA, former heads of the biopharmaceutical complex, right?
It's true. This has happened for a very long time. We know the media now is complicit, but the media itself took money from the COVID-19 Community Core Program. Remember, in early 2021, the White House and the Health and Human Services floated out $13 billion to the media, sports teams, churches, other groups. And we know now there's a listing of nearly 4,000 major media outlets that took federal money to push the government false narrative. And I can tell you that you just follow the money on this one. It's both Pfizer and the U.S. government colluding with the media. Everyone here is culpable. America should never trust a former FDA official in any capacity in the media.
Wow. Well, we'll have you back on as soon as we get the Fauci files. I'm going to be calling. I'll be calling your cell phone, Doc. We'll have you back on here as soon as we can. Dr. Peter McCullough, great work as always. Thank you so much for being a voice of reason, and thanks so much for joining us on the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I can't wait for the Fauci files. We'll have Dr. McCullough back on as soon as that drops.
He's a good perspective for like, oh, that hurt your feelings? Because I've had some pretty personal things aimed at me too.
Yeah. Oh, your feelings are hurt by that? How's that feel?
You don't like how that feels?
Kicked off Twitter, blocked, reputation sullied, ruined. Thank God he's back.
Well, and it's
though.
like, you got threats. Let me show you what I got. Like Peter McCullough and Robert Malone and Pierre Corey, like those guys.
That's a hold my beer.
Way more. Yeah,
that's not a knife.
Exactly.
This is a knife.
Right.
You want to see a knife? I'll show you a knife. We've got more news to get to here on the show. We're going to look at the World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab has his guest list available. It is out, and guess what? Davos starts. World Economic Forum starts this weekend.
I can't believe it's that time again.
It's that time of year. Did you get your invitation in the mail?
No, because I am not an unelected global leader who makes decisions for other people.
You're not a crackpot. Yeah, devious world leader.
I bought my VIP with the meet and greet afterwards. It was an extra $50, but I figure I'd like to shake some hands, you know.
Yeah, but it was the wrong one. You thought you were going to the World Economic Forum, but you're going to the World Economic Conference, and it's at a Denny's. It's the meet. You're getting meat.
And however, it's funny because, like, I don't know if you know who Lindsey Sterling is, but on her rider it says you're not allowed to pick her up. It says the same thing for Schwab. You're not supposed to pick him up. So I don't know. He must be short.
You can't pick him up.
Oh, not like pick him up in a car, but like physically pick him up.
You can't pick him up like Zelensky. You can't like pick him up and carry him.
Yeah.
Like little baby Fauci. You can't pick him up. So we're going to have the guest list. We'll tell you this is a breaking news. We got hands on some documents. We have a journalist on that in just a second. But first, we want to tell you about, it's time to subscribe to the channel, right? Just go over right now. You can subscribe and become part of our Redacted Rebel VIP program, which is, again, you can support independent journalism just for the price of a cup of coffee. You can support what we do here, very, very simple to do. So just go to Redacted.inc, and that's what you got to do. You just click on the old dingus there, and you can subscribe and become right there. See that big red button? If you're on Rumble, on locals there, you can click that big red button and do it. Do it right there. So, Philip, come on back here to a two-shot, if you would be so kind. So let's just set this up a little bit and kind of go through. Let's talk about this dossier. So the dossier, which is the Substack run by Jordan Schachtel, he got his hands on some documents, specifically the documents for the upcoming World Economic Forum. This is his Substack, the dossier. Exclusive, the dossier acquires confidential Davos attendees list. Now, we were talking, Jordan and I, he's been plugged in. He's pretty plugged in, so he gets access to some of these documents, and he's had to go through and like redact the names of a lot of different people who are showing up here. He's like, you're going to be surprised at some of the people, but he did make some headlines with some of the big names on this guest list. So let's go through some of them. Some of the ones that stand out to me specifically is the head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, is going to the World Economic Forum, along with some big 50 heads of state government have already confirmed their participation in the annual meeting. You're going to have, who else is in there?
Bill Cosby.
No, Bill Cosby's not there, but you have the CEO of Amazon. You have BlackRock.
Okay.
You have other...
Sidney Poitier.
No, Sidney Poitier is no longer alive, but that would be amazing.
Okay.
You have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so you have top officials for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Cary Grant.
Cary Grant is not going to be there. George Soros, people from the George Soros network will be there.
Liberace.
The publisher of the
Is
New
this
York...
helping?
No, it's not helping
Okay,
at all.
I'll stop.
In fact, it's in fact the opposite of helping. The publisher of the New York Times is going to be there. So all of the big heavy hitters in the media industry and the deep state government are going to be there. I had a chance to speak with Jordan Schachtel just a short time ago about these documents and who's coming to Davos. And here's what Jordan and I talked about. Well, the man that broke this story on his Substack, The Dossier, is Jordan Schachtel. Jordan, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Clayton.
So this guest list, I mean, I think it's partial. I mean, maybe they're adding guests or, a week out from the big event. So we're probably going to be adding more here. But some names really stood out to me. I mean, at the top of the list for me is the head of the FBI. How does a guy like that get invited to the World Economic Forum?
Well, it seems that the Biden administration prioritized both Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, and Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, to lead the delegation to Davos, which is supposed to be about embracing humanity and repairing the world and all this kumbaya stuff.
Right.
Yet we have intelligence officials there who are supposedly, tasked with stopping terrorism and law enforcement. And it's an interesting and revealing choice for sure.
And, they're not, you think about like, well, this is easy to say, oh, it's conspiracy theories, right? This idea, but they're not giving us, they're not pulling back on this at all, right? I mean, you write in your piece, the diabolical forces, when you have the head of the FBI is going to Davos, Switzerland. You have top officials at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation going again. You have Pfizer's officials going. I mean, at least pull back a little bit. Maybe, I don't know, send some people from some pastry shops. I don't know. I'm just make it a little nicer. But instead, you have all of the same players that are going to Davos to be a part of this.
Yeah, this really gets back to this ideology that is being advanced by the World Economic Forum and its partners. And it's basically that they want to vacuum up all of the political and monetary power into the hands of a hand-picked group of, mutually credentialing elites, and they want them all to basically be part of this Davos circle, and that the only way in is to pledge fealty to this extremist political ideology that they're obsessed with, this notion that the world is coming to an end and we need to, combat the climate, turn back that knob, and that requires, of course, rolling back all kinds of human progress and surrendering all of our liberties to the people who are going to Davos.
And over the past year, of course, we've seen many of their plans come to fruition, right? We've watched what's been unfolding in the Netherlands with the Dutch farmers, pulling back, putting really stringent nitrogen rules in place on fertilizer, sweeping through Germany, New Zealand. We're seeing pushback from the likes of certain African countries. We're seeing pushback from Brazil. You've been following this very closely. What do you anticipate we will see on this agenda over the next week or so?
Yeah, I think that they're just, continually getting more and more aggressive with their agenda, to the point that I think that they have actually exposed themselves, which is why you've seen so much blowback, particularly in the United States, with a lot of people who, prioritize human freedom and individual and national sovereignty. And they view the World Economic Forum and this Davos, in-person, invite-only, closed-doors meeting as kind of like one of the headquarters of this anti-human movement. And it's just, they're always moving forward. I mean, I reported that, they're just continually trying to centralize power into a particular set of corporations and government entities, which they have enormous influence over. And that's exactly what's on the agenda this year yet again.
Well, we really appreciate your reporting on this. Did you get your invitation yet?
I don't think I'll ever get my invitation, unfortunately, but I'd love to cover it. Klaus Schwab, you could send me an email anytime.
Right. Jordan, thanks so much for joining us. We'll be watching your reporting on this as this unfolds. And thanks for getting us an early look at this devious guest list once again. Jordan, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks, Jordan. We'll have Jordan back on next week because this is unfolding this weekend, so we'll get to see some of the stories. But he brings up a great point. Like, the Biden delegation decided, who can we send that would be, a really good representation of the Biden administration to Davos to talk about humanities and the things that they purport to talk about, which is, someone put in that chat, they're really just like the Illuminati rebranded. We're going to send the FBI, which, after all of the documents have come out from the Twitter drops, like, you're going to send the FBI?
Well, maybe because now we know that the FBI is so keen on censoring conversation.
Yeah.
They could just do that out in the open at Davos. There's no need to hide that.
But
you can't make this up.
But why not the CIA? Wouldn't that make more sense? Because isn't the FBI just like U.S. based? I mean, come on.
I guess they probably don't even announce the CIA. They just no, the CIA will be there. They just won't announce it.
It's just assumed. Yeah.
Right.
It's just assumed.
Yeah. They always have a chair. They always have a chair for the CIA. Like, who's sitting in that chair? Don't ask. There'll be somebody sitting there. Who are you with? I can't tell you who I'm with.
Right.
I'm
it's just a spy camera in the scene.
Yeah. Just some guy sitting there with like sunglasses and like smoking a cigarette. Although that's the CIA guy. You don't want to sit near him. Well, that's going to do it for Redacted on this Tuesday, on this Taco Tuesday. I hope you had a great show. I hope you enjoyed us. I hope you subscribe to the channel. We put a lot of hard work into this show, and it's free. And the only thing we ask you to do is subscribe. And we are here every day, Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, or Monday through Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So we hope you will join us and be a part of our great Redacted Rebellion community here, seeking the truth and following the truth wherever it may take us. Again, hit that subscribe button. We'll be back here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a great night, everyone.
Are you worried about